Hi, fans of high quality entertainment. I am with Chris Sutton, who has written this excellent new book, On Track Sparks, 1969 to 1979. Every album, every song,
Mm,
just from that time period there.
hmm
And I am also with Monte Mallin, who has a YouTube channel, Monte's Sparks Entertainment and Art Site. And
That's it.
so welcome, Chris and Monty. Yeah, I bought this. I had this on order for quite a few months
yeah,
and for years actually.
yeah.
And I just want to say, I buy a lot of these. Here's some of them. I have about 40 of them. Captain Beefheart, Elvis Costello, and they're all, overall they're all very good. But I would have to say that Chris's book on Sparks is one of the worst. No, one of the best. Seriously, um, I was very impressed with it. So
Thank
good
you.
job, Chris.
Thank you, Larry.
And what I really liked about it the most was you got to interview some of the former band members, like Martin Gordon,
Hmm
and so yeah, good job. And Monty also has the book.
I do. I have the book, and I've been reading it and enjoying it, and a couple places even laughing out loud because there's some really funny quotes in there from some of the folks that you interviewed. And
Yeah,
what I loved was the interviews, but also the great context that you provided for the albums,
thank
which you
you.
could only get from those interviews.
Yeah, it's the interviews were the key for me. I wouldn't do any of those books. I've done Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath, AC/DC, and I've got the Chic organisations coming out middle of next year. And what else? And Black Sabbath with Ronnie James too. This kind of things I'm interested in. But the Sparks one goes back to obviously to '74 and that Top of the Pops appearance, which was seismic. Really, I think music. I cannot begin to explain. I tried in the book and probably failed, but it was a massive, massive thing. That was that
Yeah,
show.
yeah. So that was your introduction to Sparks?
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to get across to people. Is this going out to people across the globe? Maybe
Yeah.
all sorts of. I mean, we had three channels at the time: BBC, ITV, and BBC Two. You had to watch Top of the Pops on the Thursday. You had to watch it live. You couldn't record it. You didn't know what was going to be on, apart from the number one single, and you had to put up with the dross that might be on
Yeah.
for your parents, the stuff for the teenagers. You sat through it all. That's what you did. And then you had these guys come on, Russell and Ron, with obviously the focal points, with this thing that sounded like about, I don't know, 3 hours worth of song in like 4 minutes, and it was sort of operatic and cinematic, and Ron's death stare and Russell. And that intro, I think you can't underestimate that intro. Ron's intro was just perfect for setting the song up. But when it finished, you were like, "What the hell was that?"
Yeah.
And the next day in the school playground, everybody was like, "Did you see that?
Yeah.
You know that?"
Yeah.
And then we went on holiday on the Saturday. I remember, and we went by coach. And every Radio One show that we sat through and listened to, you heard that keyboard intro and the song come on again. Then you got to the holiday camp because we were going to a Butlins camp in Skegness. And then there were all the bars around the place with the jukebox, and it was on there as well and coming out the speakers all day long. And I still think it's their best song. I know there are some fans who say it isn't, but I think it's just because time dulls your memory a bit
Mhm.
over the years. I think if you actually, and I've sat through and listened to these songs time and again, it really is, I think, the pinnacle of, for me, of what they've ever done.
Mhm.
I don't know. For me, I have trouble saying the best and the worst as
Oh
opposed to
yeah,
what I really like and what I don't really like. But I will say this: I decided to take on the task of putting together my 100 favorite Spark songs, and I've been
okay,
working on it and working on it, working on it. And number one, this town ain't big enough for the both of us. For both of us,
Yeah.
it's just it's so special and different, and it really confirms what you're saying, Chris.
for me, I think so. I mean, there are plenty of other really great Spark songs. And of course, that was the thing. Go back in '74. I knew that a band had like a name like Sparks. That meant it was a band. I could see that, 5 people. That was a band. And I think even at that stage, probably Ron and Russell, I doubt viewed it as being a band. It was probably three musicians with them, and that caused some complications as we're bound to be discussing. But I think it was like entering another world. It was like entering Ron and Russell Mael's world, and you never quite knew what the songs were going to be about and where they were going to go. And for me, the Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing, which is my favourite album, probably controversially to many, that was like a slightly darker, attic-y, dusty space with these peculiar joys to be found in it. It just seemed to me like even more fannish and a wonderful place to be than I'd found with Kimono to some degree.
Well, they've said themselves that was the last time they really were in a democratic band, at least until the 80s. But yeah,
absolutely. But that one is, I still listen to that album a lot, and it is. I just think it's terrific. Yeah, James Lowe was one of the best interviewees I had in the book, and I wish I could have gone on for hours with him. And he said the same things as I do. Falafeli on the first album, I sit there to this day waiting for Jim to do that extended little bass lick the last time around that he does it on the end. I still sit there waiting and smiling for that. And he said the same thing. James Love said, yeah, I do that too. It's like finding somebody else who shares that bizarre sort of experience.
Yeah. So that Top of the Pops performance, so what's on YouTube with that? Like I heard somewhere that the original was lost, or is that the original that's on YouTube now?
No, not as far as I know. The last time, what happened was the BBC wiped a lot of stuff to save tape, and then every year at Christmas you'd have a Christmas Top of the Pops, and they bring back some of the big acts from the year. So the Mael's got to re-record it for the Christmas show. I believe that it might well be the Christmas show version that he's on there.
Okay.
It's certainly not. I don't think that the one with Martin Gordon survives at all, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one thing other Sparks fans have been asking is, when are you doing part 2 and part 3?
Yeah, well, this is the way it goes, and this is genuine. This is not me sort of bigging it up. I think because Sparks kind of vanished from the European ether in the 1980s, largely speaking, and go to America with a series of very fine albums, in my opinion, adorable. If people feel like they want to contact the publishers in any way and say, look, we desperately want the 80s, then believe me, I'd do it. But, and there's a but, I'd only do it if I could get to talk to the guys from Gleaming Spires, Bates Motel. I think those people would be vitally important. So if anybody could give me the links. I had started already digging around and looking, but they're a little bit obscure to get hold of.
I can help you out with a couple of that. We can talk offline. Yeah. Well, what was the origin of this book? Did you go to the publisher, or did they come to you?
The origin is simply this: is as Larry showed, there's a load of books, and I came. It was during COVID lockdown because I run a museum, bit of self-promotion in Smethwick, and I've written a lot of history books. But I'd never done a music one, and I fancied doing one, and I got in touch and said I'd like to do one, and he said, who do you want to do? And I knew I could get hold of the guys from the Alice Cooper group fairly easily, and I thought they'd talk to me, so I thought that'd be a good one to play to start off with. So it was my idea to do Sparks, and instantly, as soon as we said, they went for the 70s for fairly obvious reasons. And then straight away, I thought, I've got a bit of a problem here. And it's that demo album. And I didn't feel I wanted to do the book unless the demo album was featured.
Sure.
I felt it was important to be in, which is why it's got that peculiar 69, 79 feel. That demo album did cause some talks, should we say, about the book. And was one of the reasons why the book was delayed a bit.
So there was some concern in some parties about actually doing the demo album, which, I mean, it's publicly available. It's easy to get.
What happened was, which is the way it comes across to me, was the publishers, BMG, got in touch to say, we understand you've got a book coming out on Sparks. We'd like to see the book. We've been asked to have a look at it. And I kind of held my breath and thought, I think I have toned down a lot of the comments and left out some of the more unsavory ones. But what came back was they didn't want any unreleased material discussed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I cut out most of the Arista demos, as we call them, and I just went with the ones that have been released as bonus tracks. And I thought I'm okay with that. But they wanted the demo album taken out, so I said I really don't want the book going out without the demo album, and I don't think that's very fair. It's all over the internet. It's on YouTube. And so there was this kind of impasse for ages where nothing happened. And then I thought, hang on a minute. They show it to Todd Rundgren in the film, in the bonus features, I think. They actually hold it up. This is the demo album with so many copies of. And I said, well, that surely is indicating it was released of a sort. And, you know, and in the end, they said, okay, you can have it. You can have the demo album in.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's positive, you know, your thoughts on it overall. And it is a very, like, I wasn't expecting it when I opened the book, right? I didn't really pay attention in 1969. I open up the book and, you know, I'm expecting Sparks Half Nelson, and then it's, oh, the Half Nelson demo album. And I was really pleased to see that.
Well, when you do these books, Larry, what you're doing, you're trying to, I think, there's the people who, and I do know some readers who've said this, that they got kimono propaganda, heard Indiscreet, but hadn't really bothered with anything else. So there were those. Then there's people like yourselves at Monte who've got the whole journey. And I remember when I got that demo album, that was like a gift from heaven almost. It was like, oh my God, there's another early Sparks album. You know, I thought, great. And I think a lot of it really stands up pretty well. Yeah. I really do.
Well, I mean, they didn't even call it a demo album.
No.
Right? I mean, so they thought, here's our album, and now we'll just go and somebody will want to buy it and sign a contract.
Yeah, I actually found the guy who I can't name, who released it, to the point where it got available all over YouTube and everywhere, and where my copy of it came from, I think, in the end. But he doesn't want to be named.
I think I know who it is, because I received from this Sparks fan. This is when it first kind of came on the internet, and I received it too. So yeah.
But yeah, I think it's terrific. I think all of the albums through the 1970s have their moments. Some of them I found I reappraised. Introducing Sparks, I had my favourites, but it wasn't one I was particularly overly excited about. But I became more excited about it by listening to it again and again and again and again. And so that was one that came back to me. I think that's probably the worst cover. I think covers make a big difference on an album as well. I think that was pushing it a bit too much, but yeah, still.
I haven't quite got there with Introducing, but I know a lot of people love it. But I
do. Yeah,
I haven't quite got there. You know, one of these days it'll click. But
when I saw,
it does have a couple great songs for sure.
Yeah, when I saw Sparks on their solo tour here in Toronto, they did those mysteries, which I was really pleased with. You know, they obviously respect the song too, to be doing it live. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the 21 Nights, I only got to the last one performance, unfortunately, but Goofing Off was definitely one of the biggest songs in the second half.
Yeah,
that was a party down the front during that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember that well.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about the guitar solo on that, and you know, the way the musicians came to it. That was really, really great to read that.
That guy Tom Rotella, who plays that solo, he was such. He loves Sparks. He loves the album. He was actually waiting for the call to be in the film, and of course the call didn't come, which is a shame.
And then you had some really great interviews with the Big Beat guys too, because that's to me a very interesting period, going from something like Indiscreet, which is such a smash, to Number One in Heaven, which was groundbreaking, and then you had that kind of weird period where they were trying to find their way. And would that be your impression?
Yeah, I think if anything lets Big Beat down for me, I don't think it's the sound. I think the cover does not in the slightest way go with what you're going to get inside at all.
Because it's a band album, right? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is. The guy I did a podcast with, Booked on Rock podcast, and I knew Eric was going to pick that as his favourite because he's a real rocker, you know. And my God, it really does let rip on big beat at times. Ronnie's dialed down, so it's quite interesting when you hear the couple of live shows, which are sort of sample quality on YouTube and are around. So you hear a bit more Ron than you do on the Big Beat album. But yeah, I do like Big Beat very much indeed. I do. Yeah. You mentioned, can I say you mentioned the people who were interviewed? In case people are curious, what I did was I made a list of everybody who'd appeared with them live and been on the records, engineers, producers, musicians, every single person. And my goal is always to try and get the whole lot. Never going to happen. But what's surprising is it's the deep people like Dean Detrick Jr. was one I felt was like a yes moment. To get this guy to actually contact me and say, yeah, I do know Ron and Russell Mael, and yes, I did come up with the title of Angus Desire. That was a great moment. Certainly Ralph Oswald. Mm-hmm. I tracked him down running a piano tuning business, which he does, I think, in Los Angeles, and I managed to find an email and phone number and rang him up cold, and he was great to talk to. Those guys are great. I was saying earlier, Monty, to Larry before you came on, to sit looking at a screen like you and knowing that James Mank is going to answer the phone in 2 hours, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 20 minutes. By the time the phone rang, my mouth was as dry as anything because this is James Mankey, you know?
Yeah.
And then you get a guy on the phone who's as sweet and modest and understated as anybody in this world could be.
He really comes across that way.
Big time. Yeah. He tried to get me Earl Mankey, obviously his brother, but Earl wasn't taking calls or answering emails. And in many cases, I think it's down to what's happening in their world, or they'll think, well, I don't really want to talk about this. What's in it for me? I don't know what the reasons would be, but all those factors, I think, come into it.
I get the feeling that James Mankey does not really appreciate his own contributions as much as we do. No.
Categorically, no.
Wow.
I kept saying to him, James, 40, 50 years I've been listening to Falafel, enjoying that, your solo on Whippings and Apologies, No Mr. Nice Guys. You know, I think what you do. And he just would say, well, thank you. It sounds like I deserve an A for my performance. And there was no kind of pride, really, I would say, that a very understated, a lovely man. Harley Feinstein was probably the most informative in many ways. You felt if Harley told you something, it was undeniably going to be true.
Yeah.
I'd have him as a witness in court.
Harley is great.
Yeah.
And he was terrific. Martin Gordon is terrific fun to talk to. He also has the advantage was he made notes at the time. He showed me his diaries and his notebooks where he made notes, copious notes. Yeah. And I don't think he has an axe to grind. I think Martin's been a bit misportrayed by some people. There's things he's unhappy about, absolutely, and I think he probably has a right to feel unhappy. Mm-hmm. But he was very praiseworthy in his comments about the songs and what they did. Yeah. He certainly appreciated Ron Mael's gifts and what he could do. Yeah. So that was good.
The one thing, when reading this book and you get to the songs on Kimono My House, the last two songs, In My Family and Equator, I know how Martin, I always knew for quite a few years, how he felt about them being kind of lesser tracks, and a lot of the fan base too. And I kind of went along with it for all these years. But the funny thing is, after reading this book, I listened to Kimono for the first time in probably a few months. And I felt for the first time In My Family and Equator were equal to the other songs on the album. So, well, it took a few years though.
Good. That's good. I think an album that I've kind of struggled with a bit more maybe than Introducing Sparks, I think is Indiscreet. And I'm not quite sure I know I have an issue. I feel it's a bit too much of lots of things. And there's like a band album and there's an orchestral album, and Ron's not on Looks, and which to me seemed, when I found that out, I was utterly shocked that he's not even on it. But
Yeah, that was surprising. And one thing you were in the book, you were wondering about on Happy Hunting Ground.
Mm.
You weren't sure who's singing the line, "It's fair, fair game inside."
It's very high, and I know Mary Hopkins.
I actually, back in the day, I don't think you can do it now. I emailed, I don't know, even remember how it happened, but I sent a message to Tony Visconti, and he wrote back that it's Mary Hopkins singing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did contact Visconti, and I tried, but he didn't want to do it, basically.
Yeah.
Whatever, he's fine.
Yeah.
And I did try Mary as well via her daughter, and everybody I tried. I go on Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. These people are generally everywhere.
Yeah.
Some will talk to you and some won't. Engineers are great, by the way. If anyone else has engineers, they are there for everything, and I'd recommend always talking to an engineer.
Yeah. And also around, I don't know, about 1998 or so, I was messaging Adrian Fisher a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I ended up sending him, because he hadn't heard Kimono or Propaganda in quite a few years. So I sent him, I think it was a cassette tape of it, along with like the best of Eric Clapton, because he's a big Eric Clapton fan. So that's my little personal story about Adrian Fisher. And he was such a great guitarist. And yeah.
He is. I mean, you're right, actually. Again, Monty, you listen to people like Fish, and I listen to the albums again and again. And sometimes I'm just going to follow Adrian all the way through the album. I'm going to follow Martin through the album, which is what I tried to do. And Adrian's so good. And then you look at the rest of his career and you think, what a shame that there's not more of Adrian Fisher's guitar. He was in Boxer. He did that. But there's not a lot else for such a talented man.
Yeah.
Really talented guy.
He was extremely talented, and it seems like it's a little hard reading the book. It seems like it's a little hard to get a sense of where Ron and Russell really came down in terms of how they felt about him, because sometimes it's a little affectionate and sometimes it's a little bit less.
The strong impression I got was that they didn't want like an Axe Hero kind of guitar lead, that style. But then you have this peculiar thing, and which is bizarre. Put it out there, the Brian May story.
Right.
It's bizarre. You've got a guy who's writing songs with Queen. That was never going to work, was it? But apparently it's allegedly true. And then this bizarre thing that Martin confirmed from his diary about them having rehearsals with other guitar players after saying goodbye to Adrian in the studio, and while they were recording the Kimono album. I think that they just. My opinion, I don't think Ron and Russell Mael do confrontation. I think they have these ideas and where they want to go, and I totally understand this. I think they would rather just kind of work around those things than point blank sort of face them up. Is my guess.
Well, you really immerse yourself in a large part of their career, and you know the rest of their career, the rest of what's not in the book, and. Do you get the sense that at that point in their career, they had a sense of where they wanted to go, or were they trying to figure it out as they went?
My guess is I think they were figuring out as they went. Kimono's a logical step. I can see that. Whether they were intending to bring the other guys over or not is still a bit up in the air. But they had a backing band, and I think they must have viewed it as a backing band. And I think Kimono and Propaganda are kind of certainly, very close to each other in a way. The big change comes with Indiscreet, doesn't it? That's a huge change. And Trevor White talks about, I mean, he noticed that at the time they were doing it, that there was clearly some change there in the way they perceived themselves and what they wanted to do. So whether that was kind of a catalyst for them to then say, well, we can be this, we can be that, we can do this.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that's where they really decided we can do this, we can do that. But I'll even take it a step further, and I'd be really interested in your thoughts about this, is that if you listen to the first album and then you listen to Woofer, it clearly had a very experimental sense to it, and especially on Woofer, where they had a producer who really understood how to bring out so much in them, and their musicians, their musicianship was higher. It's kind of all over the place too. And then they kind of went to the UK and they did the 2 albums, which were kind of in a certain mold under Muff Winwood. But then it always seemed to me, then they had that success and they were able to build on it with Indiscreet by going back to what they really wanted to do, which was, why don't we just be as experimental as we really want and test the form, stretch this pop form and see where it takes us.
I think that's a very interesting point, Monty, and I hadn't considered that, but I can see exactly where you're coming from with that. In some ways, I could see that Indiscreet's kind of a more grown-up, better produced version of where they were at with Woofer, for argument's sake. It's got that diversity, which I love on Woofer, which I said to Larry is still my favourite Sparks album. So yeah, I guess you're probably right. But then to go from Indiscreet, where the journey after that, I mean, that who could have predicted where they would go next after Indiscreet?
Yeah. Well, the fact that they just left the country and started new, that kind of charts their path.
Yeah. So back in the day, Chris, was there a point where you kind of lost interest in them for quite a while? Or?
To be totally blunt with you, I remember switching on the television on Saturday morning, watching a program called TWEETER'S in Britain, and they announced that Sparks were back, with this new album called Introducing Sparks, and you were like, what? What? And then I think they played, I think it was Over the Summer came on, and I remember thinking, I'm not getting this. I'm really not getting this at all. And there was next to no promotion in the UK. It was like somebody had given up, presumably the record label. So over here in the UK, they kind of Big Beat introducing, they just kind of did nothing, and then they came back, and this was the shock for me personally, was being at that age, I was 17, 18 years old, and now Sparks come back with #1 in Heaven, and my God, that's an adjustment. Suddenly it's kind of like these sort of disco rhythms and so on, and I found that difficult at the time. I didn't after a while, but at the time it was a huge shock.
Mm-hmm.
Shock.
And the mention of Queen in the book. So Queen never actually opened up for Sparks, right?
No. Harley Feinstein is absolutely adamant that it never happened.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at it, he's referring, I think there's a poster or a flyer where they're both on the same flyer, but they don't say they're on the same day at the marquee.
Right.
You've probably seen that. I think they're right. Sparks. I think Sparks only played once at the marquee anyway. So I don't think so. No, they were certainly aware of Brian May, but the person I nearly got to talk to who had some health issues, I think I can say that's okay, was John Hewlett, and he was the guy that you'd most want to talk to, probably above anybody else, the Sparks in the 70s. And John Hewlett must have some stories to tell, but he wasn't telling. And there's a few points in the book where there are some key decisions that are made, and it's John Hewlett who is there on the ground making those decisions.
And your talk with Rupert Holmes, did it change your mind at all about the Big Beat album and the production and everything getting?
Do you know, it did, to be honest, because as we all know, there was that single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which, do you know, I begrudged having bought that at the time. I remember putting it on, and I remember thinking, what on earth is this?
Yeah.
So I didn't like that at all. In fact, to be honest, I still don't like it at all, really. But it's Sparks, and because it's Sparks, as we know, you'll find some way that you can listen to it and get some enjoyment out of it. Because it's Ron and Russell Mael, and that's what we do.
Yep.
And that's fine. But Rupert Holmes was so courteous, took the time. He explained that this was what they wanted to do, so that's what he gave them. and he was as shocked as anyone when they came back and said, "Would you mind perhaps doing this album? And this is what we want to do." And the pressure that the guys were under to make that album was colossal, having to come up with a running order before they'd even anywhere near finished recording it, with a sleeve that had already been created. And then there was this thing about, I Like Girls being the version he'd already recorded and having to disguise it so it sounds like it was recorded at the same
I
time.
never knew that. Yeah,
I never knew that either.
Yeah.
But isn't it obvious when you listen to it after you're told that?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go back and listen
Yeah.
to it. But yeah, when I read that, I was surprised, and I also found it very interesting about "I Want to Hold Your Hand," because I remember first hearing it and saying, "Oh, this is a satire. This is a joke."
I thought it was a joke. Yeah. But I
And-
think it's sincere now.
I'm
Like,
still
they're
not
just-
sure. I'm still not sure, even after reading
I'll
it.
ask Russell.
I think now I'm in my 60s. Can I say this? It's taken me decades, but I'm more okay with it now. I think it's that intro. I think that intro absolutely just sends me through the floor.
But if you listen to it as satire, then it's just perfect. It's the perfect intro. It's so over the top.
Well, that's what I'm going to do from now on, Monty. I think you found my way in finally after all these decades that I can find a way to listen to it, and laugh.
Do you,
One-
go ahead. Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about, you probably don't have the answer, but why, after all these years, why doesn't Ron and Russell own some of their back catalog?
I don't
There's
know.
all these record companies, right? Like,
I suspect that what they're doing is they're trying to put it right as time's gone on. There's a few little signs, little Beethoven records and so on. They're certainly very keen to do so. Where I get disappointed was, for example, is this recent reissue of Propaganda and Kimono as a double, with nothing extra of any interest really to me. What I was looking forward to and crossing my fingers was a high resolution Blu-ray 5.1 mix. Something of that nature would have got me on board. And I think that I'm still personally after all these years. I think I mentioned in the book, I think there is supposed to be a soundboard of Paris around in 1974 or something. It's supposed to exist. And if either of you know anyone who has a copy of that, then I'd be very interested in hearing it. Can we say that? Yeah, we can. I think I just
sure.
so that would be very, very nice indeed. Or any other unreleased material. I think they could certainly do a stronger job on their back catalogue and making it available again.
Even the demo album, right? That could be
I'm surprised
remastered.
that they haven't really done that with the demo album. I mean, they could capitalize on that.
Yeah.
I know they don't like to look backwards, but still, it's there.
And then in the book, I think if you might, Harley Feinstein does refer to the fact that Larry Dupont certainly has recordings. I think he says in his garage from the sessions when they were recording those first two albums and other things lying around. So there is material still out there. That's I guess it's maybe it's a dwindling band of us of a certain age who can get excited about the demo album.
You know what I would love to hear are some live recordings from the pre-Kimono band. And I've talked to certain Sparks fans, as we're calling them, and they said they just don't have them. People who are very completists in their catalogs.
I asked Harley and James that directly, as you'd imagine. Is there anything out there? And Harley said, ask Larry. They said he's the guy you want to go to. If there's anything, Larry's got it, but he might not know because he might not have been in the garage for however long.
Yeah. So you think it might be there, but not on the verge of coming out and being shared. I
tried Larry, but I couldn't get hold of him. If either of you do know how to get hold of him, then I would say, give him a try and see if he has.
So Larry, I'm going to get really in the weeds here, so pardon me for doing it. But one of the things I loved reading about where you laid out where Russell came out in the paper mache boat, and it wasn't Slow Boat, which I had always assumed. Always.
Well, I didn't actually ask that information. I think that was just given to me as a kind of a correction point. And I must admit, it seems to fit for Slow Boat completely, doesn't it?
Of course.
Makes sense. Makes more sense for Slow Boat. But no, I think it was Harley said that, didn't he? And he was absolutely, I mean, literally, you'd have him, as I said, you'd have him as a witness in court any day, Harley.
Yeah.
If he says that's how it is, that's how it is.
That was the ending of No More Mr. Nice Guys, right? Is that what he said?
Well, I didn't. I went to the pictures and I looked at it. So I'm still seeing this as Slow Boat, but
yeah.
That's what he reckons.
Well, it's a great book.
Do you know, I'll tell you one of the other joys of going back to him was Adrian Munsey, this Say Sheep thing that he did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the people like Adrian, when you do a book like this, you get hold of them and they're fairly easy to get hold of. And they're overjoyed that anybody wants to ask them about this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll talk to you all evening about it. But to find that Ron Mael, he's actually playing the keyboard synths on that, I thought, great, I'll take that all day long. That was... and, you know, when you listen to it, which I hopefully people will go and listen to it, you know, it's a really, really nice instrumental track on that.
I've never heard of I've heard of it for years, but never checked it out. Have you heard it, Monty?
You need to
I heard it years ago and said, okay, I'm moving on from this. I mean, I did listen years ago. Yeah. But
well, I found it had a certain charm.
Here, I was just looking. Here's one of the quotes that had me laughing out loud. Is when you were talking about "Girl from Germany," and you say Harley is not so impressed. Musically, it's very good, but lyrically, it's one of the stupidest songs I've ever heard.
Yeah,
that's great.
Well, yeah, that was a moment because you're talking to a guy like Harley Feinstein, who's been a hero of mine since I was a teenager, and I love "Girl from Germany." I mean, I love that song, and I thought he was going to be with me all the way on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of jumps off immediately. And I'm thinking, I love these lyrics, Harley. I love this song.
Yeah. Well, it's just like with the Moon Over Kentucky. I never knew that James, that he wrote the song, like the lyrics.
No, it does he either.
And then Russell's kind of, you know, at least at the time, right? He's kind of bashing the lyrics. It's like, no, it's a great song, Russell.
Oh, yeah.
But everybody's got opinion. Like, for instance, you're not a big fan of Confusion on Big Beat, and it's my favorite song on Big Beat.
That's fine, and I'll defend your right.
And I threw this book when I read that.
Well, unfortunately, this is the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and everybody's got an opinion on what they like and don't like.
I mean, one I'm not keen on is Pineapple, but I know people who love that track.
Yeah, that hurt. That hurt. And
but I do agree that England would have been, like, if I had a choice between Pineapple and England for Indiscreet, it would be England for me.
Oh, England! Oh gosh, that was a joy. I love that track. I absolutely adored England. Fantastic. Did you notice a thing I discovered about the males changing their ages in the teen magazines at the time, making themselves appear a bit younger as they all did? And that wonderful story about recording Kimono on a cross-channel ferry.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that when I read up on that.
Well, I'll tell you one other place I have a contrary view. As far as I'm concerned, the end of Equator could go on for another 10 minutes.
Well,
it's that
great song. Are we allowed to use profanities on this or not?
What's that?
And I think Miss the Start, Miss the End is a perfect ending to Indiscreet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can see where you're coming from on that. I really do understand where you're coming from on that. And again, I think that's the thing with Sparks is there are all these different opinions and thoughts you can have on these songs, and it's hard to think of another band that can inspire that in the way that Sparks do. I think that is a real strength to what they do.
So when Indiscreet did come out, did you buy it?
Yes, and the reason we bought it, and again, this goes back, was when I was young, you bought records because of the one before it, predominantly. So propaganda, great. So obviously, this is going to be something more and like that. So that was why I tended to buy stuff or the single, you'd heard the single or whatever, and you think, well, okay with that. And it was certainly a more diverse album, and Monty's now got this interesting view of it, which is more like a more sophisticated woofer in some ways, I guess you might call it. I can get that. I think that's an interesting point of view. I know Trevor White had his reservations because I think he could see that they weren't getting used on everything.
Yeah.
It's an interesting album. I'm not sure it necessarily hangs together completely as an album at times. I think it's one of those, depends what sort of mood I'm in. Would you like it? Is it a favourite of yours, Larry?
Indiscreet? Yeah, it's one of my, like, as soon as I bought it, I wasn't disappointed at all. It was totally, it was certainly different, but, and same with Big Beat. I loved that. Even Number One in Heaven. The first one I was disappointed in was Terminal Jive. Because it was,
well, that's interesting because Simon Draper is in the book at Virgin. I mean, he was instant that, okay, we're not going any further with this, because it is a real fall off, isn't it? I've heard incidentally that Ron doesn't play a note on the album.
We've heard that. Not sure.
Terminal Jive. Yeah. We've also heard that he had 21 songs that he submitted for the album, and 20 of them were rejected.
There's something, the album does feel a little turgid, perhaps.
Bland. Yeah.
Because, again, as we said, because it is Sparks, there's always something you can get from everything. And I do genuinely believe that. There's always something there that will make me go, well, I'm listening to this. I'm okay.
Yeah. When you're listening to it, you can enjoy it, hear that Sparks elements. But then when you go back and say, what do I feel like playing from Sparks? That may not be the one that's going to be first on your list.
100%. That's exactly it. Yeah. If we put on Terminal Jive now, I'd sit and listen to it with you, and we'd have a great time. I'm sure we would. But it was a definite falling off from Number One in Heaven. And I suspect that might be because of Giorgio Moroder's lack of influence and not being on it. I think his influence is actually quite underrated on the Number One in Heaven album.
No, that really came out in your book.
Well, when you look at the credits and you look at who's doing what, you do sort of think that Moroder's influence is immensely strong on it. It really is, which is fine. That's what I like about what Ron and Russell do. When they get that sparksness, as I think we call it a few times, I think that's great when you mix it with different songs and things.
Yeah. So Chris, have you seen? Obviously, you've seen Sparks in concert, or? Yeah,
many times. When
was the first time?
This is going to sound ridiculous. I didn't see them on the Kimono Propaganda Tour 74 for whatever reasons, probably age and so on. And then they sort of did a bunk, as we say in Britain, and just vanished. And the next time they came back, was it, let me get it right, was it 89, 90 something when they came back for, when was Gratuitous Sax? 97, was it?
94, I think.
94, sorry. That tour, they came back for Gratuitous Sax and they played Wolverhampton. And I went and I was at the front. And I think I knew nearly everybody at the front from when I was younger. It was like we had a reunion meeting from the school playground and so on. And there we all were. And you know what's great? The greatest moment was falling in love with myself again. There was people just swaying to falling in love with myself again and having a great time.
Yep.
One of these deep cuts. And that was just a tear-jerking moment. It really, really was. Yeah. It was.
And have you seen them more recently at all?
Yeah, I go on every tour. I'm not one of those who goes around and does 3 or 4 or 5 gigs. I'll do the local one generally. I've been to every tour. And what really impresses me is the fact they seem to have now defined themselves as what they do. And I think the last run of albums, you could put tracks on each of the albums and it wouldn't make a lot of difference. But I think that their worldview and how they do it and how they construct the songs is so strong now. I think they could keep going for a few more years yet, I would imagine.
And you must have been pretty pleased that they did Beaver O'Lindy.
Well, I always am. I think they've reached that age now, haven't they, where they'll drag some of these deep cuts forward, and it's always interesting what they do. They have a great band. They've worked out what to do with Russell's voice as well, which is interesting because, you know, let's be honest, the guy is getting older.
Yep.
And I think it's very clever the way they handle his vocals. He doesn't necessarily turbocharge his voice on everything. He doesn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron's still outstanding. But
You
I
know,
do
Russell still sings in the same key. Those songs have not been modulated for him, as far as I can tell. I don't think a single, like Bon Voyage, still sounds like Bon Voyage.
Yeah, it is immensely impressive. It really, really is. And I think we're very lucky to have Sparks in our lives musically. It's a very interesting, diverse catalogue. What I find is that I trying to persuade people they might like Sparks. You guys have definitely had this. It's kind of, what do you give people to get them into it? And I've resorted to doing compilations for people in the past.
I think the recent past tense is excellent. Like, you know, it covers almost all of their career. So that's the one I say. Like, instead of, you know, like, if you say Kimono My House, that's not really all that Sparks have done. Like, it's, you know, just a tiny bit of what they can do, you know. Yeah,
absolutely. When I do these sort of books, where I work at the museum, what book are you writing now? Sparks. Who was Sparks? They'll go, and I go, the guy with the moustache and this. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. But you have to go down that route to kind of explain who they are.
Yeah. Okay. So, any more questions there, Monty, before we wrap this up?
I want to throw something out. And get your reaction to it. You're talking in the song "Nothing Is Sacred," and you're talking about you have some quotes from James, and you said James points to the lyrics, observing that Ron had not yet learned to hide all his feelings. By the time he got to England, he had. That sentence really stuck out to me, and I'm really wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
It was one of those moments where you think, I'm not going to say anything at all. I'm just going to keep extremely quiet and let him carry on. I didn't expect that to come at all. That surprised me as well, Monty. That there's one of those moments where you think, oh yes, that's a great quote. Ron hiding his feelings. Ron's lyrics are interesting, aren't they? I always notice, I think that women often seem to come over in certain ways in his lyrics, for example. They seem to be either unattainable or problematic or mysterious, or, it's like something for the girl with everything. You're racing to keep up with that. And so I noticed that there always seems to be these issues with ladies going on in a lot of the lyrics. But hiding his feelings, I don't know. That really surprised me as well, Monty. I put it in because I thought it was a thought-provoking statement. James is certain of what he said.
Yeah.
I think you referred back to Fletcher on Her Armour as an example of Ron showing feelings. But I didn't really see that as necessarily the case. What's your view?
I think that they've very rarely come at it from a personal perspective. It's always a storytelling, or it's a character or something like that. And they like to have those big narratives. But what I've heard is that, and I don't know him personally, so I can't speak to how he handles his feelings, but he doesn't really put it in his music. But what I've heard is in the last 2 or 3 albums, you're starting to see signs of what they think about things. And you got hints of that with in the album that had Hippopotamus. You got a little bit more of that with All That and a couple other tunes. But then on Latte, there's just so much there about it. Doesn't have to be that way. So much talking, not that well defined. It seems to me retrospective. And I know they say they don't like to be retrospective, but to me, it's unmistakable that on that last album, there's really talking about themselves a lot and their career and where it's gone and how they feel about things and lessons learned. So that's what I think, since you asked. You can cut all that, Larry, if you want.
I will. I will.
No,
No problem. No
no, I
problem.
think it's a very good point. I think, yes, certainly they were talking about characters in the songs in the past. So it would be a character's point or a character's situation. And I think you're quite right there. Songs like All That and other ones that you've mentioned on the recent albums do sound like they're speaking from a personal point of view. That's another interesting point. So I would agree with you on that. That's how it does come over to me.
Yeah. But yeah, you don't get his feelings in those earlier albums, Big Boy or whatever. They're just kind of his observations about things or his story that he wants to tell.
I mean, Big Boy is one of those frustration songs, as I tend to think of, a Small F, where there's a situation that you can't control and get up, but this is how it is. This guy comes around and kicks sand in your face. And I find that interesting with Sparks, because these are all kind of things I've encountered in life and seen. And these little comments and situations, like, here comes Bob, where he's driving around crashing into cars. And I found these things actually understandable when I was young, which probably says a lot about me, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's a great lyricist. It has to be said. Probably one of the best. If you want interesting lyrics, and the one that got me back to that Top of the Pops was when he says daily, except for Sunday.
Yeah,
that really hit me hard. I thought that's so clever.
Yeah, it's reality, right? Like, it's
absolute reality.
He didn't have to add that, but
no,
most songwriters wouldn't, right? But he did.
No,
yeah.
No, they wouldn't. And it was that little slice of reality in there, which is delivered so well by Russell. Yeah. And I thought, I'm in this for the ride. I didn't know where the ride was going to go. None of us do. You can probably get counselling for this kind of addiction that we have to the males, I would imagine. Must do. But yeah. It's been quite a journey. Do either of you kind of know them or speak to them in any way?
No.
I had one conversation with them when I was in line after a concert they did in LA that I went out to, and I was being shuffled through the line. And I talked to them for a good, I still remember I had a great conversation with Russell, or at least to me it was, but it lasted a grand total of about 15 seconds. So, yeah. And it was like, next. But I said a couple things. I thanked them, and I said, thank you for being the soundtrack of my life for so long. But then I said, I've always been one of those people in the Sparks Need Guitars camp. But after seeing this show, this was when they were just the two of them with a drummer. I said, I really get what you're coming from, where you're coming from, and what you're trying to do with your music. And it was great. And that seemed like the only time I got like a real reaction from Russell. He's like, thank you. Thank you very much. And I remember that because it seemed like the guard went down just for a teeny second. So that's why it stayed in my mind all these years.
Yeah, I enjoyed the documentary, The Sparks Brothers. I thought was exceptionally good. And there's a couple of revealing comments in there. Do you remember the scene, Monty, where I mentioned this in the book because Miss the Start, Miss the End, which you mentioned as a song you like, Larry. Ron does talk about that in the film. In the DVD, he actually talks about going into the cinemas with his dad. His dad would take him. Yeah. And that's how it was in Britain. You could actually walk in halfway through a film, watch the support feature, and then watch the beginning of the film that you walked in on. And so it's an interesting example of Ron commenting, I'm sure, back on something he experienced when he was young.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I'm in the Larry Graves camp on that one. Love the song.
Yeah.
I do. I just sometimes on the sequencing of songs is where I kind of have a problem with Sparks.
I kind of consider Indiscreet almost like the Beatles' White Album done by Sparks on one album. Yeah, just a variety of different genres, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Propaganda really impressed me because you're aware of these songs that Ron, for whatever reason, isn't even going to use on Propaganda. Yeah. He doesn't use any of these songs he's built up. And comes out with an entire new set of songs in what, about 6 months or something.
That's amazing.
The one thing I thought that you were going to ask me about, have we got time?
Yep.
That was the whole thing that Paul Rudolph came out with about the session that he did with Mick Taylor from the Rolling Stones and Mike Kelly from Spooky Tooth. And that really, really shocked me because I didn't know that was coming. What had happened was Martin Gordon told me that his first job with Sparks was effectively doing hand claps or backing vocals or something on an overdub session that had been arranged. That Paul Rudolph was at, playing a guitar overdub. And I kind of know Paul Rudolph in a way, because he played in one of my other favourite bands, Hawkwind. And I've had chats with him over the years, and he's been very revealing about who did what and so on and so forth. So I got hold of him and said, you're involved with Sparks. And he came out with this thing about them doing those demo sessions with Mick Taylor from the Stones. And I thought, that can't be right.
Yeah. Must be another Mick Taylor.
Well, I did. And I went back to him and said, really? And he said, yeah, really, absolutely. And this seemed to go on for quite some time. And I found other ways of trying to come back and ask effectively the same question, because I thought, I don't want to sound a complete idiot, but he was 100% absolutely adamant about it.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Well, that would have been something.
Yeah. Well, if he's right, then I think that, is it Alabama Right? I think was the track that must have come from that session, because Trevor White never played on it. Martin Gordon never played on it. And they were completely and utterly unfamiliar with it. And I was saying earlier, Monty, this is the thing that I had. You write down a sequence of da-da-da-da-da and how things go. And then you start to think, well, hang on a minute. This doesn't all kind of quite gel together. Like Muffin would say that at the moment he was approached, there was no plan whatsoever to bring over Harley or the Mankeys at all. Then you have this postcard, which, thank the Lord, James Lowe actually found. He'd been asked to find it for the film, couldn't find it. And he said, would you like to see this postcard from Ron, where he says that we're still trying to get the guys over? And I said, oh, yes, please. And he sent it, fair play to him. And that was nice to see that had been possible, that maybe that could have happened.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you ever I'm sorry, but did you ever get to hear the tapes with Mick Ronson?
Right, that's in the book, isn't it? And I was trying to narrow it down, and basically that's a covert appeal, which you picked up on, Monty, where I'm saying if somebody out there has got those tapes with Mick Ronson, I desperately need to hear them. You haven't got them, have you?
No.
Oh. I kind of know. I know who has. I think Hilly Michaels. He wouldn't come back to me for whatever reason.
Really? Yeah, he's a good guy. He might have them. But go ahead, Larry. I didn't mean to.
No, I was just saying. So you can get this on Amazon Canada or Amazon US, and where else, Chris? And UK, of course.
It's on Burning Shed in the UK, which is. It is good. It's also on Amazon, and if there's a good enough response, shameless plug, and people bother the publishers, then Sparks in the 80s, I would think, is probably likely to happen. In which case, I'll be talking to you guys about that, because that would be a joy to kind of map out that journey. I think Sparks in the 80s is a fantastic era. So many unbelievably great songs in that era.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Monty. And like I said, this is an excellent book. I'm very happy with it. So good work, Chris.
Absolutely. I'll second it.
Thank you both. It means the world to me. When you're writing that, you kind of, I don't go looking for what people say or think about it, because you're always kind of worried, what if they don't like it? But I really, to have like hardcore fans like yourself like it.
Yep.
That means the world to me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.